Friday the 28th of March, welcome to Hooked on Sport. Whether you're a long-time listener or it's your first time, get ready for an exciting episode as Ben Hook investigates this week's big issues in sport. Tennis SA's Dylan Hicks will be with us to discuss the State League tennis finals from Memorial Drive. Local summer finals are being decided. Sheffield Shield final is underway at Rolton Oval. And Port played Essendon last night in Melbourne. Now let's catch up with Ben Hook. G'day, Hookie.
I'm tired just listening to everything you've listed. It's a great time of year, March, isn't it? Because, I mean, not only is the fringe and the festival on, but the fact that the sports overlap, there's so much to talk about, so much to do. The poor old newspapers and television news programs can't get enough into their sport break. There's so much going on. So it is really cool at the moment. We've got plenty to chat about. Let's get straight into it.
Great. So Sheffield Shield, day 3 this morning starts at about 10:30.
Yeah, what an opening day from South Australia. Absolutely superb. Won the toss and bowled, which is a bold decision to bowl. B-O-L-D decision to B-O-W-L. They were superb. The first 15 minutes, you could feel the murmurs around, oh, gee, have they made the right decision? We dropped a couple of catches. Khawaja looked like he was potentially going to be in it for the long haul. However, after that, they were just superb. They were a little bit leg side as well. But gee, after the first 20, 25 minutes, the bowling was absolutely superb. They caught well. They probably got a little bit lucky with a ball that looked like could have been a no ball, but was Phil Gillespie, the third umpire, determined that there was just enough foot behind the line to get away with that. So all out 95, and it was always going to be marginal batting on the first day, and we lost probably a couple of more wickets than we would have liked. But the partnerships yesterday morning, Ben Menenti, Jake Lehman, then Nathan McAndrew, Jake Lehman, set South Australia up for a lead of 176. Jake Lehman's been the punching bag of South Australian cricket for the last 6, 12 months, 2 years. He's got 100 in each of his last 3 Sheffield Shield games. And I had a look. He also got 100 in a club game in the middle of February. So he's got 4 tons inside a month. It's been a little bit over a month, I beg your pardon. But his Shield centuries have come on, I think it was March 9, March 17, March 27. I mean, that is just exceptional form. He was not quite the leading run scorer, but he got 67 in the one-day final, which was March 1. So March 2025, Jake Lehman, he's gone from people raging about him actually being in the team to not only just one of the first picked, but he suddenly puts himself in the frame. I mean, outsider, but in the frame to play some higher level cricket. Maybe he's going to be around the mark for an Australia A type of selection. He potentially become someone that a Big Bash franchise looks at as well again. So, yeah, what a reinvention. He's not quite as pretty as his dad. His dad was such a beautiful flowing stroke maker. He's a little more sort of hard-edged, I think, would be a way I'd describe Jake. But he just is so comfortable in his own skin at the moment. He's batting beautifully. So 102, last man out. They're 3 for 177, so they've got a lead of 1 run now, Queensland. I think South Australia ideally would have liked another wicket or 2, but if you were told that you were going to have 3 wickets and 2 of them were going to be Usman Khawaja and Marnus Labuschagne, they're 2 international players, that they're the guys you want back in the shed. So, Wallace, I really feel like the first hour yesterday was so critical with South Australia, 6 for 158, but still not really in control of the game. They played a wonderful first hour with Lehman and Menenti. I feel like this first hour this morning, which is only a couple of hours away, is just so critical now as well. If South Australia take 2 wickets in that first hour, that's probably broken the back of the game. But if Queensland can still be 3 out at 11:30, 12 o'clock, and suddenly they're up to 220, 230. They're thinking about posting 400, 450, and South Australia's got a reasonable chase on its hand on a 4th, 5th day wicket. So, yeah, it's very much still in the balance, but this first hour I'm so excited for. It's going to be so much pressure on.
Yeah, and the weather's going to be good. I agree. It's been very exciting. I think listening to the ABC radio coverage yesterday, they sort of indicated they felt like it was a shared day. Day 1 to Adelaide or South Australia. Day 2 a shared day. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
That's it's an accurate assessment. But Tim Nielsen's one of those commentators on the ABC, and we talk a bit when he's off air, and I just take a moment to get out of the booth that I'm sitting in, which is as the ground announcer. And he has often said to me, it's a really interesting theory that you don't really know who's won a day until you're an hour into the next day. So I think, South Australia on day one probably won it, but they couldn't really confirm that until an hour into day two. So I think whoever's won day two is probably going to be determined an hour into day three because of what they've been able to set up the previous day. Can they capitalise tomorrow morning? So, marginal day, but someone can actually take honours with a really good first hour. So the other thing is this wicket is giving nothing to bowlers. So the first 4 hours of the match, it was zinging around. It was moving all the way through. And even I thought the ball did swing a little bit yesterday morning, but you can just tell there's no zip in this wicket whatsoever. It's a bit different to perhaps what we've seen at Adelaide Oval, where the ball continues to bounce and carry. They are identical drop-in wickets, so there's no real explanation for why this one doesn't seem to be performing quite the same. But it just looks like the bowlers, the classic example is Ben McDermott came to the crease at number 5 for Queensland, and Brendan Doggett started bowling at him with 0 slips. That suggests that the ball just isn't coming onto the bat, and it's going to be hard work for bowlers from here to get people out. But, the big question is, can Queensland establish enough of a lead to give South Australia a challenging fourth innings chase? And you can't rule that out right now because South Australia haven't got enough of them out.
Now, before we leave the Sheffield Shield final, Mark Taylor, I saw during the week, shares your opinion that maybe the Sheffield Shield final format's run its course.
Yeah, I've always seen it as a tiny bit contrived. I've seen it historically. You only had to draw the match to win, and so the home team would notoriously produce an absolute, M1 highway of a road, just flat, designed for batting, giving absolutely nothing to the bowlers, and the home team would try and bat over the course of 2 innings for as much as they possibly could and try and win the game by a draw. And I've always thought, well, I'm not really comfortable with that. That's not the way the rules work now. The rules work on a bonus point system in the first innings. Now, I won't bore you with the detail of it, but South Australia will win if this is a draw. So if we had 3 days of rain from here, obviously not forecast, but if that was the case, South Australia would win the Sheffield Shield. But even then, I just feel like, well, that's a bit of a Mickey Mouse way of determining a winner. South Australia have been such a dominant performer in the Sheffield Shield this year. The flip side is if they had have been behind in these first innings bonus points, I think that would have been really unreasonable as a situation that Queensland would win the Shield in that scenario rather than South Australia, with South Australia having dominated it all year in this sort of Mickey Mouse way of determining who wins a final if you don't get an outright result. So... yeah, and then the other thing is the game that meaningful anymore? It was designed as a sort of almost an extra test match when it first came in 82, 83. And I do understand that it does have that feeling of that extra level of pressure. The crowds have been amazing too, Wallace. I'm getting to the ground at about 9:30 and there's 500, 600 people already at the ground and, over 1,000 people when play starts. So from that perspective, it's been great. But yeah, the way I just don't know. South Australia's won the Sheffield Shield by rights so comfortably this year that I just don't know that this is a great way of determining it. It's in a part of the year where cricket's sort of a bit of almost like a forgotten thing. End of March, people are starting to move on. We're well into footy season now. We're talking about round 3 shortly, aren't we? So, look, I do think there are some. They will have to think about what happens to the Sheffield Shield final long term, and I wouldn't be surprised if those conversations are already being had, in particular if Mark Taylor is voicing them as someone who's previously been on the board of Cricket Australia.
Now, Wednesday night, you emceed the Bradman Rolton medals at Adelaide Oval. Here there was some close counts.
Yeah, there really was. Let's just stick with the main two, which is the Bradman and the Rolton. I'll start with the Rolton medal. It was won by Sarah Lowe. She becomes just the second 3-time winner of the medal. She won it in a tie with Emma Sampson in 2016-17 and a tie with a relative unknown, Shania McKinnon, her name is, who came from Mildura, I reckon, and just had one great year, and I don't think we ever really saw her again. So Sarah Lowe wins her third. She wins this one outright on her own. She's been captain of the Kensington Cricket Club that have won 4 straight premierships. I think by her own admission, this wasn't her best year, but she plays every game and she is always in the game as a batter and a bowler and the skipper of the team. I'm really pleased for her. Her mother, Jane, is one of the great devotees of club and women's cricket. She couldn't be there. She was away in Melbourne, which was unfortunate because if there's one person that I really wanted to see Sarah win that medal, it would have been her mum, Jane. But she's sort of a remarkable character. She's very, very witty. She'd actually won the Shelley Nitschke medal as well, which is the T20 award, but she'd won that because Alex Price, another star of this competition who plays for Sturt, had been deemed ineligible after being reported and found guilty of an offence. And the first thing Sarah gets up and says is she wants to thank Alex for getting reported once again during the year. So, she's quite a remarkable human being, Sarah Lowe. 3-time winner, just the second in history to do so. Chris Britt, a Test cricketer, won the first 3 ever Rolton medals, and now Sarah with 3 as well. So she's undoubtedly not the greatest player of the competition, but it's most significant with what she's done in the game. Bradman medal,
yep.
4-way tie, Wallace. Unprecedented in the competition. There's been 7 ties in the past and 1 3-way tie. So the 4-way tie was Harry Manenti of West Torrens, Cameron Valenti of Port Adelaide, Noah McFadden of Adelaide, and Brad Davis of Sturt. Brad won his second medal. His father, Gary, won it in 1983. So a second-time father-son because Brad's obviously won it twice. He's a batter with Sturt. Had a great start to the year. I did the maths. He was on 18 votes after round 6, and he made 28 runs for the total rest of the season. So I knew full well that he was going to be stuck on 18. It was just, could anyone go past that? Well, 3 finished tied with him. Cameron Valenti went 6 votes in the last 2 games. He'd had an ordinary year and then just came home with an absolute wet sail. There's a funny story about Valenti. 3-time winner now. There's only 5 of those. He's the 5th. And they're all, just legends of the competition. The story is he'd retired in December. He wasn't playing well. His wife works as a nurse. They've got 2 kids. So she was going to take some Saturday work and he was going to start doing some parenting. For whatever reason, he continued with the season and finishes up winning the Bradman medal, which is quite incredible. He's a real interesting character, Cam. I'm always a bit worried when I hand him the microphone, but he spoke really well. He did talk about cricket being such a stupid sport, and if you've played enough cricket, you understand that. Yeah. Harry Manenti, this is a story, Wallace. It's his second year in Adelaide playing for West Torrens. 3 years ago, he played in the Tasmanian League and won the Emerson Rodwell medal, which is the duplicate medal for the Bradman medal down in Tasmania. So he's no stranger to these sorts of awards. He's the brother of Ben Manenti, who's playing in the Sheffield Shield match for South Australia. They come from a rugby family. If anyone's seen Harry or Ben, you'll probably understand that because they've got that rugby stature. Their dad, John, played club rugby in Sydney and now is one of the best-known coaches in international rugby. He's coached overseas. He's coached the Australian men's and women's sevens team. So he's got that's their pedigree is rugby, and they're both those barrel-chested, strong type of players. So Harry wins his first at just 21, 22. He made his debut for the Adelaide Strikers this year as well. So he's got a huge future. And then the 4th was Noah McFadden. He becomes the second father-son winner. His dad, Brian, won it for Port Adelaide in 1991. It's his first year in Adelaide. He played with Adelaide. His brother, Connor, plays league footy for Sturt and has been down here for a couple of years. Noah lives with Nathan McSweeney. They were mates at Northern Suburbs before Nathan came down to play for South Australia, and that was, I guess, the catalyst for him to come down and have a crack as well. I'm not sure this is right, and I never got the opportunity to ask, but I'm pretty certain that Nathan, just from what I could tell, Noah's debut game for Northern Suburbs up there in Queensland was a day that Nathan McSweeney made 204. So needless to say, Nathan would have a bit of an influence over Noah, and the fact that he's come down here and done very well in the club competition is amazing. So, it's a massive monologue there, isn't it? Everything I've told you about the Bradman medal, but I think it was a huge night.
Well, I think you must have had your hands full interviewing 4 at a time.
Yeah, well, I gave up. I interviewed Sarah, and it's funny because it's a big night. There's three different live counts, and I'm actually, announcing Sarah Lowe as the winner, and I realised I didn't have my notes about her, which meant I didn't have my notes about any of the Bradman medalists either. So thankfully, Sarah, I know, is a pretty good speaker, and it allowed me just to sneak off stage and go and dig out where my notes were on all of the other winners. But yeah, I mean, when you've got four, there's no point interviewing them. People will be there all night. I just let them speak. But it was really an incredible night to see four winners, and it'll be interesting to see because they're playing a few less games now. Wallace, there's a bit more investment in the T20 competition. And the one-day competition has sort of been segregated out. So where there would be 12 or 13 games that would be eligible for votes, there's only 10 now.
Right.
So because it's constricted down, is four winners an anomaly, or are we going to see events like this a little bit more often? It'll be an interesting question. I don't really know the answer. I spoke to Laurie Colliver, who knows his cricket back to front, commentating on Fox Sports KO and the Cricket Australia live stream. Sort of like, he's the lead guy, if you like, knows more about South Australian and Australian cricket than anyone, really. He was saying, wonder if they need to change the voting system if you're going to have four winners. I mean, look, I think Laurie, it's worth thinking about for sure, and I agree that Laurie is on the right track. But at the same time, Noah McFadden got 5 votes in the last game. You can get a maximum of 6, 3 from each umpire. If he had have got 6, and a lot of people thought he was getting 6 in the last game, then he would have won by 1. Yeah. It would have been a 3-way runner-up, and no one would be talking about this. So, the 4-way tie may be an anomaly, I suspect, but it'll be something to keep an eye on.
Now, last week we previewed the Kensington-Glenelg Women's One-Day Grand Final. What was the outcome of that one?
Yeah, well, Kensington did it again. So, Wallace, I know a few people do listen to us, and I think I used the terminology Kensington during the minor round this year have really fallen off a cliff.
You did.
They went into a preliminary final away. They finished third. There's only 5 teams in the competition, so third of 5 isn't fantastic by Kensington's standards. They went into a preliminary final against Sturt, and there were periods in that game where they looked like they were done and found a way to win, forced 3 runouts late, and then they did exactly the same thing in the grand final against Glenelg. This is played at Park 25, number 2. They took wickets early, then consistently bowled Glenelg out for, I feel like it was in the low 90s. It was less than what Queensland scored in the first innings. And it was like watching a boa constrictor suffocate its prey. They just close in, make it difficult. They give nothing away. They're all smart cricketers. They've brought a few new players in this year, but you can just tell that they are well-versed, well-led. Jamie Pinelli, their coach, Sarah Lowe, we've talked about, their captain, just made it impossible for the young Glenelg team to get any breathing space whatsoever. And then even though Kensington didn't bat well, they were 5 for 50 and wobbling a little bit, but there was a 6-wicket partnership that went on to win the match. And so Kensington have won 4 straight titles. It's only happened 3 times in women's cricket. Port Adelaide did it in 2004, and a club called ENC did it in the early 50s. They were actually won 5 in a row. So, Kensington, not just the best team this year for winning the flag, but they've been the best team of the last 20 years. They are quite incredible. And Jamie Pinelli, I spoke to Jamie on Bradman Medal Night, and I mean, I don't know the specifics and I don't want to get into it, but he did talk about there were some individual health challenges and some collective team challenges that they had a lot of difficulty working through this year. So the fact that they've got through all of that and won a 4th straight title, it's pretty remarkable. There's some special people involved there.
And you've got a preview for the men's grand final this weekend?
Yeah, so it'll be Kensington versus Tea Tree Gully. Tea Tree Gully, probably the best team this year. They played a home semi-final against West Torrens and won that reasonably comfortably. They've got the best bowler in the competition by wickets taken, Tim Oakley. They will lose Luke Holman, who was their English recruit, who was the leading run scorer in the competition this year. So that'll be a hole that they'll need to fill. But they do bat pretty deep, I think. They're very, very good side. This will be played at Woodville Oval. They'll take on Kensington. Kensington has just reinvented itself. I remember they won a premiership 3-4 years ago. It was Jake Brown and Elliot Opie who led the way in batting and bowling respectively. And it's a completely different team now. So you'll see names like James Cleggett, their captain Josh Doyle, Jack Matchett, Christian Leticoat. These guys have really stepped up and made this competition and this team their own. They've had their opportunity to learn under some of the bigger names that have moved on and retired. And I think the other thing that'll be interesting to see is whether Henry Thornton plays for Kensington. He'll be a huge pickup if he comes back in. He was left out of the South Australian team for the Sheffield Shield final. So I'm looking forward to this game. I think it'll be really interesting. And if Kensington win yet another title, my goodness, what a club they have developed into. It's impressive. I can't describe it any other way. I mean, they've always been a bit Port Adelaide-like from an SANFL footy perspective. They're sort of always successful and always kind of have everyone else's nose out of joint. That is true, but at the same time, you can only be you can only admire what they've done.
So there was a lot of excitement after Port's big win last weekend over Richmond. Not so much after last night's game against Essendon.
Yeah, look, Port were poor. Let's just make that point. Port were poor. And so they've had 2 disappointing weeks out of the opening 3 rounds of the season. It's a funny time AFL football right now, Wallace. I feel like with the amount of opinion and analysis television that is going on around the competition right now, that we're going to be in a situation where every week 3 clubs will be in crisis. Yeah. So if I go back to opening round, there was only 2 games played, and Collingwood was in crisis. They were too old and they were too slow. And Sydney was in crisis. New coach, a couple of new players come in. Were they going to fall off the cliff? Then you go to round 1. Collingwood win and everything's fine. But suddenly Port and Carlton, who'd lost to Richmond, and St Kilda, who were diabolically bad against the Adelaide Football Club, were in crisis, And then round 2 comes along and Essendon lose terribly to the Crows, and Melbourne put in that shocker against North Melbourne, and Fremantle go down to Sydney, and there's your 3 clubs in crisis for the week. And now, of course, here we are, round 3, Port Adelaide's going to be back in the spotlight. But you look at all of those crises that I'm referring to. Collingwood in crisis, won comfortably against Port Adelaide the next week. Sydney in crisis, an incredible away win against Fremantle last weekend. Port Adelaide beat Richmond, as we talked about. St Kilda go on and beat Geelong. Essendon suddenly win last night. So all of these teams, the scrutiny's there, and it's probably a bit above and beyond what's reasonable, because one win you've not talked about, one loss, and you're back on the rack, aren't you? So it's good to see that these teams are dealing with this level of scrutiny, which is kind of unprecedented when you think that Channel 7's beefed up its analysis programs. Fox is doing just as much, if not more, and Nine has certainly beefed theirs up as well. So, good luck being an AFL footballer or an AFL football club if you're a little bit sensitive, because everyone is coming for you right now, and I don't think anyone's quite as good or as bad as what they're being made out to be. Having said that, Port were poor, and they'll have to, start to work out where they're at. They are missing a few, we know that, but I'm not ruling them out. I certainly feel like they're very much a finals team, but they can't keep putting in poor performances like they have 2 weeks out of 3 this year.
Now the SNFL season is just around the corner.
Yeah, look, I love SNFL footy, Wallace. I grew up on it. I was following it before AFL footy really took hold, before the Adelaide Crows and before Port Adelaide went into the AFL. I think we're going to have a really interesting, even competition this year. And I also think that a lot of the best teams have really beefed themselves up and are going to be even better than perhaps what they were in the past. So first thing that'll happen is that the Crows and Port Adelaide have far better concessions in the SANFL this year. They've been able to recruit better named players. And I actually think if the Adelaide Crows can stay as injury-free as what they currently are at AFL level, their SANFL team is going to be very, very strong. They finished 6th last year and came home with a bit of a run, but they're a chance to win it, Wallace. that's how good I think the Adelaide Football Club will be this year. They've got a new coach, Matthew Wright. They've done very well with bringing in some marquee players, if you like. So they're going to be very good. Glenelg, two-time flag winners, and they bring in Jared Lyons and Paddy Parnell. They'll be AFL level footballers right now. Jared Lyons towards the end of his career. Paddy Parnell probably a little bit unlucky not to be still on an AFL list. And then Sturt bring in Marty Frederick, and Tom Emmett comes back. Tom was amazing playing for Fremantle last year, played 15 games for the club, and delisted at the end of the year, back in with Sturt. So I think Glenelg and Sturt are going to be very strong. And then I think Norwood will be an interesting watch as well. Jade Sheedy takes over as coach from Jade Rawlings. Sheedy's an excellent coach. He did some incredible things with Woodville West Torrens where he really didn't have the resources. He's got the resources this year. He'll be frustrated with one thing, and they lost Lachlan McAndrew as their ruckman. Alex Van Wyck was earmarked as going to be their ruckman, but transferred to North Adelaide. That's okay. They were going to recruit Lachlan McAndrew, who found himself on the Adelaide Crows list when Kieran Strawn went onto the long-term injury list. They're really impressed with this Lachlan McAndrew. He's a very, very tall ruckman who looked really good in some pre-season trial matches, but he was for everything going to sign with Norwood, and suddenly got the call up to join the Adelaide Crows senior list. And so the one thing you'd say with Norwood is that they're going to lack some height around the ground, but outside of that, I think they'll be very strong as well. So my top four teams, Wallace, for this year, without having really researched it well enough, I'll go Glenelg, Sturt, Crows, Norwood. I think Eagles and Central will fight out for the 5th spot. I reckon North and Port, I can't rule either of them out. I think they'll both be very strong. But Port Adelaide, I mean, if you have injuries at AFL level, that transfers to your depth at SANFL level. We get that. And then I think West Adelaide and South Adelaide probably going to be bringing up the rear again. West have improved, but I just don't think they've improved at the rate all the other teams that were already ahead of them were. And South are just so young. My brother-in-law's involved in their coaching group. That's the way they've determined that they're going to go for the long term. Jared Wright is their coach, good guy, understands footy. And Jeff Baines is the president, and I think he's prepared to work through a few of the challenges they've had historically down there. So they've been moving on a lot of their more senior players, so they'll struggle for a while, but for good reasons, I think. So I'm excited for the competition. I think there's 8 teams that can genuinely win it.
Right. With the Souths, didn't they have a success with their 19s last year or the year before?
Oh, you could be right, Wallace. I don't know off the top of my head. But they're a young group learning football still, and that's a path they've chosen. So I just hope they stick with it, because it's very easy for a club to just sort of go, gee, we're worse than we thought, let's tip it out and start again. And Jared's the right guy to be coaching them. I think Bainesy, he's the sort of guy who's the calm head who will understand that this is a bit of a long haul. I think they've got the right people in and around the place. But yeah, sometimes sponsors and members can just rail so much, can't they, that you feel an obligation to do something different. So I hope that the Panthers stay the course.
Let me give you an update on the grand finals for baseball. For Division 1 men's grand final, Sturt was successful in 2 games over Henley and Grange, 7-1, 4-1, to make Sturt back-to-back premiers. So they've beaten Henley and Grange this year and last year to win the championship.
Do you have the score for the second game, the one that Henley won?
They didn't win the second one. No, Sturt won the first one 7-1, and Sturt won the first one 7-1, and the second one 4-1.
It was one of the semi-finals that went to 3 games, and they were wild scores. That was what I had in my head. Right. Sorry, yes, this was straight sets for Sturt, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And the first game, it was tight. There were a few errors that happened, and I got to tell you, Kai Hampton, who got the MVP for the grand final series, was pitching for Sturt and pitched the most amazing game. It was just sensational to see. A few things went Sturt's way, but they came out in top 7-1, 4-1 for a premiership.
And the women?
And the women, wow, what a topsy-turvy final. So just one game on the Sunday. Final score was 12-9, and Woodville came out champions. Alice Brown was the MVP of the grand final. The lead changed so many times, so it was very, very exciting. Good on Woodville. They came out on top at the end of a very close one.
Alice Brown, I did a story on her for the paper, Wallace. Now, it was either 1 or 2 years ago, but she was the best player in the boys under 16 competition, and now here she is in Division 1 women. So she could be no older than 17, and already a real leader in that competition. So she's going to be one to watch long term, Alice Brown.
Now, softball.
Adelaide softball. Walkerville will play Seacombe on Saturday night. Seacombe beat Port Adelaide on Wednesday night. So we've got the battle of the two big name pitchers in the competition. You remember we had James Harris on the show 3 or 4 weeks ago. He outlined this. Taylor Caudle is pitching for Walkerville. An absolute superstar. Generally, the way it works, Wallace, is if you can find a big name pitcher out of the US who's happy to come in and play for your club in Adelaide, you are around the mark. So that's what Walkerville have done with Taylor Caudle. They were top and then won their semi-final against Seacombe to go straight through to the grand final. Seacombe beat Port Adelaide on the back of Regan Dias, who is another superstar pitcher. So this is going to be a battle of two big name pitchers, and whichever batting unit can just get on base and force a run or two, this will be a low scoring game for sure. But that's going to be the challenge, is trying to get some safe hits and get on base against these two-star pitchers. Then, of course, the following night is the Kath Coral medal count, and those two are going to be very much leading the way in that as well. That's their best and fairest, the Kath Coral. So, big couple of nights ahead in South Australian softball, Walkerville and Seacombe. My tip, probably Walkerville just.
Terrific, Ben. After the break, Ben catches up with Tennis SA's Dylan Hicks to recap the State League Tennis Grand Finals.
If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd encourage you to take a listen to Beyond the Club. It's a project I've been working on with Flinders University. Now I co-host it with Professor Sam Elliott, and we break down all the latest research on how to maximise the experience of junior and club athletes. There's a range of resources, special guests, and cutting-edge info on how you can make your club a safer, happier place for your kids and their club mates. Beyond the Club, wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Hooked on Sport. You're with Ben Hook. We're going to turn our attention to State League Tennis. It wrapped up a couple of weeks ago now, a couple of massive finals there at Memorial Drive. And to take us through it is the head of the State League competition here in South Australia. His name is Dylan Hicks. He's been good enough to join us. Dylan, welcome to Hooked on Sport.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Dylan, let's get started with the State League finals a couple of weeks ago now, so almost a distant memory for us, mate. But we might start with what happened with the women. Maybe a bit of a turn up for the books with the way things played out. The drive getting up over Seacliff, probably the big surprise, I think, and you'll know more about this than me. But Glenlee not making it after have been the dominant club of the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a big surprise to everyone seeing the grand final that played out. Having the third and fourth place teams playing in the grand final with Memorial Drive versus Seacliff. It's the first time, as you said, like in 5 years that Glenlee women haven't been represented in the grand final, and they've obviously had a great run and a great history there, being the team to beat year on year. And this year they unfortunately fell to Memorial Drive, but then that was a great opportunity for Memorial Drive and Seacliff to take that opportunity at the Drive.
What's the experience like for these players to step out on that amazing centre court that I can see behind you? Unfortunately, this is an audio medium, so no one can actually see what I'm talking about, but you've got a pretty spectacular office there, and I imagine that's a great opportunity for these young rising stars of local sport to get an opportunity on an elite court.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this is the home of tennis for us here in South Australia, and getting the opportunity to play a grand final out here, we're hoping is a really great experience for some of these players. Obviously, you know, some of the best players in the world have played out on that centre court out there, like Novak Djokovic and the likes of him during the Adelaide International. And, you know, some of these kids, this might be the highest level they reach, and to be able to come out here and play on the same court as some of the best players in the world, it's a pretty cool experience. And they get all the bells and whistles as well. They get the chair umpires, the ball kids, the line umpires. You know, that's not something you get in tennis week to week because it's quite hard to resource. But on grand final day, you get everything.
Let's just talk about the rubbers itself. So the Drive get over the line 4-2. How did it play out?
Yeah, it was a close contest between the two teams. Opening it up with obviously having a bit of a split in the singles. They went two apiece, and it was a bit of a I guess, moment for the Drive that they were reliving what had happened in the past. That's the same thing that happened the year before against Glenlee. It went split going into the doubles. And yeah, tight contest is exactly what you want for a grand final, to have two live doubles playing next to each other, not knowing the result. And funny enough, it ended up being Olivia Giotis and her partner that last year had lost in a match tiebreak, had managed to turn it around and actually win in a match tiebreak this time. So it was quite a good turnaround to see the Drive, go from what they went through last year, being so close to, winning the title, to then actually getting it this year. And I guess they were boosted by their number one player, Christina Ty. She's one of our up and coming players here for South Australia, and she's on her way to college next year. So she'll be going over there to be getting an education and playing some of the better players that are in college next year. So we will lose her to the state league competition, but it was great to see her to be able to come back and represent Memorial Drive and finally get that grand final for them.
For the Drive, you've given that discussion on the extent to which they suffered some pain in the last year or so. What was the reaction like after they got it done a couple of weeks
ago?
They
were pretty ecstatic. Yeah. The comment that was finally said was, we finally got one. We finally got one, because they've had a couple of opportunities there. They've been there the last 3 years. So, when you get there year on year, it can be a bit disheartening when you're not getting across the line. And they've got a pretty solid team over the years where they haven't really lost anyone. They've had kind of the same lineup year on year. So it was pretty special for them as a team to win that one.
Seacliff bounced out in the semi-final. That must have stunned the tennis world, because I think it was pretty comprehensive as well. They went 5-1 down.
Yeah, that's correct. It was a bit of a funny weekend because the Saturday was heated out, and all the women's had to come back on the Sunday to play their matches. So that kind of threw out the norm of when you normally play. But yeah, to come out and win 5-1 was a pretty dominant display by Seacliff. And Glenlee, as normal throughout the whole season, they were the team to beat. They finished the season as minor premiers, but they were without Sarah Mildren, their number one player. Sarah Mildren, she's an up-and-coming junior. She's 16 and she's playing on the ITF tour at the moment, and she's actually having some really good results. And that's the thing with State League. Sometimes you can lose players throughout the season because the next step for these players is to go play on the ITF Junior Tour, or if you're a bit older, playing on the Pro Tour, if you're looking to go down that pathway. So it can always get interesting at the back end of a season sometimes, where certain players have to, take that next step for them as a player. So yeah, Glenlee obviously didn't have their number one, but it was still a big surprise to see Seacliff win that so well.
Yeah, interesting, the margins, isn't it? One player drops out, everyone's got to shuffle up one. It just goes to show that community sport can be very, very tight sometimes.
That's it.
The margins are incredibly close, aren't they? Pete Gardens gets up over Trinity in the men 4-1. It looked a lot tighter than what the Rubbers score probably demonstrates, Dylan.
Yeah, that's correct. The Rubbers don't really give a true reflection of the match itself. We had Dale Nixon versus Stefan Bianche from Pete Gardens, and they had like an amazing match. They went the full 3 sets. The atmosphere out here on the Drive, they played on the Saturday Twilight event, and the crowd was just going wild out here. Like, their match was unbelievably good. And then other matches were quite tight themselves as well. But then heading in those 2 doubles that they played, they were still live. So even though that it was 3-1 in the singles, both teams still had to win. Well, Pete Gardens had to win a doubles, or Trinity had to win both. And that was quite exciting because they started exactly at the same time, next door to each other, and they were going back and forth. And there was a combination from Pete Gardens in their second doubles in Brad Mousley and Daniel Hobart. Daniel Hobart was quite a up-and-coming junior player that played on the ITF tour. He did have an ATP point when he was a junior, and he's kind of returning back to the scene again, which is great to see. And Brad Mousley, he was a up-and-coming junior as well, playing at the Australian Open and so on. So it was quite a tight contest, and then they just turned on to another level in the third set. Daniel Hobart was winding it back. He brought out some of these amazing backhands in the match tiebreak, and yeah, it was quite good to watch. And they were playing against Trinity Gardens, who had Michael Smith, and he's another young one to watch out for. He's 17 years of age. He's been on the ITF Junior Tour. He won 3 titles in 2024. And yeah, he won his singles and kind of like was keeping Trinity in the game. But unfortunately for Trinity, Pete Gardens got the job done again for a third time in a row. Trinity runners up for the third year in a row. So they've been having these battles year on year. And, Pete Gardens are a team to beat. And they were without their number one player as well in Sean Van Rensburg. So it's kind of funny that during the final series, some of these top tier players went out, but the quality of tennis and what we saw out here on the drive was just amazing.
Is Peak Gardens the traditional power club of state league tennis in men?
No, so Peak Gardens have kind of come on the scene in the last 3-4 years, and they've just been able to get a really good list of players out at their club, and they have been the force to reckon with within the last 3-4 as they've come into the scene. But before that, yeah, traditionally your stronger clubs were your Trinity Gardens, Tea Tree Gully, Sea Cliff Tennis Club, the likes of that. In the men's, it's kind of, there hasn't been really a dominant team for a while until Pete Gardens has come in. It was kind of shared amongst the clubs year on year who was winning these grand finals. But now Pete Gardens, they are the team to beat now. And they also know they're the team to beat, and I think they love that. Which is good to see.
Just take us through the structure of the competition. So we have a 16 women's state league competition, a 4-team men's state league competition. I imagine there's like a large conical gathering of more and more clubs as you go down the divisions. Are you comfortable with that as the competition? Would you prefer to see a broader state league, or do you like the fact that there is quite a peak at the top where it's pretty condensed and the best players are playing against each other pretty regularly?
Yeah, so traditionally for a while now we've had 6 and 6, so 6 in the men, 6 in the women. This year, as you said, we went to 4 in the men and 6 in the women. Ideally, we would like more teams competing at the top. I think it comes down to the pool of players and who's on those lists and how strong those lists are. This year we had in the men's quite big team lists that varied from 6 to 10 players on a list. That just gives those players a bit more flexibility, whether they're traveling on the tour, their coaches, it allows them to play the best tennis possible, but also gives them that flexibility to be able to compete in other events, because there's always other competing factors in tennis. So we want to provide the best competition for these players at a state level when they're home. But obviously we understand that players also need to take that next step and either try and make it on the professional tour, or they go to college and get an education. There's those aspects to it as well. So it can change year on year, but we're always looking at ways on how we can improve the competition and get the best players playing.
How does that work, Dylan? So we've got this state league competition that's wonderful, and the community gets in behind it. But how does a player, and I guess you've identified with a number of the names that you've already mentioned, Sarah Mildren, a classic example, but how do these players go from representing their club at state league level and move on to hopefully on our television screens on Channel 9 representing the state and the country at an Australian Open?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's different for every player. Everyone takes a bit of a different journey, and that comes down to obviously, their coaches, their club. Each state has their own high performance team as well that guides these players on their journey and where they should go. And some of these players will start at a junior level and they'll be playing on the ITF Junior Tour, having really good results, which then leads to them getting opportunities at, Grand Slams and so on, which then might win them a wild card into a pro tour event. And if they have some success there, they might get some points and then they're on their way. Some players decide to go down the college route and go and play college for 3-4 years, and then they come back on the tour. And we've seen some good results in that aspect. But then there's even players like Lee too, where he was a very talented junior and kind of went on the tour, then kind of stopped. Then he started playing in our state league competition. He was one of our best players in the state league competition for a very long time. And then COVID hit, and his UTR events came on, and he played in those and had some good success. And now he's finding himself playing in major events on the ATP Tour and Grand Slams. He played Alcaraz in the US Open last year, and he was playing in our backyard here in South Australia not that long ago, playing against our local players. So it just shows that, it does take a bit of a luck, but determination as well. And you got to take the jump, because it is a lot of effort and work to become a professional tennis player. You got to travel, you got to fly to different countries, the cost of it as well. So there's a lot in it for a player to make that step.
I've been lucky enough to chat to Lito a couple of times, in particular when he was really just sort of re-establishing his game at the professional level, and then to see him taking on Carlos Alcaraz, taking a set off Carlos Alcaraz, no less, centre court at Flushing Meadow. I mean, what an incredible experience that was. I don't want you to put the mozzer on anyone, Dylan, but is there someone around local tennis that we should be maybe keeping an eye on, who we hope to see possibly making those brave steps into the professional world in the coming years?
Yeah, I think it would, as I said earlier, I think Sarah Mildren's definitely one to keep an eye out on. Michael Smith, he's another young up-and-coming player. And then we also hope for like our local state league players. We've got the likes of Sean Van Rensburg that plays for Peak Gardens, Dale Nixon that plays for Trinity Gardens. These guys are in their mid-20s at the moment, and they do go over to Europe over in the winter to go play in the Germany league over there, which is, giving them opportunities. But you never know, they might, play in a couple of Pro Tour local events, and you never know, their journey might be a bit like Lee too as well, which we can only hope for. But at the same time, we're very lucky that our local players get the opportunity to play against people like Ashwin Vijay Aragavan here as well. He's an ex-Davis Cup player for India, and we do get some good experience for our kids here. But yeah, it's definitely a watch this space. But we hope that any of these state league players can find the next step for them and that journey.
You're steering the ship of competitions here in South Australia. Did you get out yourself, mate? You a serve volleyer or a baseline specialist yourself?
I am definitely not a top tier player. I am one of the ones that I'll grind out a match and hope that the opposition makes a mistake. I'm a bit of a rallier. I'll just keep going, and the hotter it is, the better it is for me.
Well, just, whatever grade it is fine. Which club do you play for? What division do you find yourself in most weeks?
So I've been playing in Metro Lawn for Millswood. So that's the Saturday morning lawn comp there. So allows me to get out in the morning before the afternoon tennis starts. The phone starts ringing while those matches on, and we administrate those competitions. So I still like to get out there and have a game and catch up with mates and that. So it's good fun.
Dylan, great insight into tennis in South Australia, in particular at state league level, where we love flicking on the TV, seeing how deep Tanasi can go in a major tournament, of course. But very excited about what's coming next. Thanks for your time on Hooked on Sport, and we look forward to continuing to keep an eye on what's going on around state league tennis. Appreciate your company.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
So, Ben, we've talked about the Sheffield Shield. What's your prediction?
I still think South Australia will win. I think it goes into day 4. I reckon South Australia is going to have to chase something in the vicinity of over 150, somewhere between 150 and 250. And I think it'll rely on the opening batters just being able to see off a bit of the new ball. And then I think with this wicket on day 4, I expect South Australia to win in the middle session of day 4, which is tomorrow. So that's probably my hope as much as my prediction. But I still think South Australia wins from here.
Okay, what's your prediction for Crows North Melbourne on Sunday?
Yeah, the Crows have just looked so impressive in their first 2 games. North Melbourne clearly improved. They got some experience around their young kids, and with a coach like Alistair Clarkson, they're always going to be competitive once he gets a few resources in. I think Adelaide wins. I expect them to win pretty comfortably as well. I just think they are on such a roll at the moment, and this is a side that they will like the look of. They'll be looking forward to playing at home. So, Adelaide by, let's say, 35 points.
And a running update, please.
Yeah, good. Still good. I've started my official runner app training program, Wallace. It's encouraging me. I would just go out and jog, and sometimes I'd go a little bit faster and sometimes I'd go a little bit slower. But I'm adding some 400s. I'm adding some interval training, some fartlek training, those sorts of things. So I'm looking at my program next week, and I'm worried about the speed. It is starting to encourage me to run. I've got a 2K session to do in the middle of a longer run that I've sort of got to finish in around about 10 minutes, which is a bit under that, about 9.5. So that's quite quick running for me for what I've been used to. I've sort of generally been around about 5:15 to 6:20 trying to do faster, slower stuff. So to bump it up to 4:45 will be a good challenge.
Excellent. Mate, terrific episode. Forward to catching up with you next week.
Love it, mate. Good on you.